الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين الحمد لله الذي خلق السماوات والأرض وجعل الظلمات والنور ثم الذين كفروا بربهم يعدلون الحمد لله الذي له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وله الحمد في الآخرة وهو الحكيم الخبير وقل الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ ولدا ولم يكن له شريك في الملك ولم يكن له ولي من الذل وكبره تكبيرا الحمد لله الذي أنزل على عبده الكتاب ولم يجعل له عوجا قيما لينذر بأسا شديدا من لدنه ويبشر المؤمنين الذين يعملون الصالحات أن لهم أجرا حسنا ماكثين فيه أبدا الحمد لله فاطر السماوات والأرض جاعل الملائكة رسلا أولي أجنحة مثنى وثلاث ورباع يزيد في الخلق ما يشاء إن الله على كل شيء قدير الحمد لله ثم الحمد لله ثم الحمد لله وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله وصفيه من خلقه وخليله بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح الأمة وجاهد في الله حق جهاده حتى أتاه من ربه اليقين فصلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى صحابته الأخيار وعلى التابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين ثم أما بعد. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praises be to the One, the Creator, the Sustainer of the heavens and the earth, and may Allah's peace and blessings be upon His final messenger, Muhammad. I bear witness there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and I bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him, is His final messenger. Brothers and sisters, before we start, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant a quick recovery and health to Sheikh Shakir, who was a little bit sick, so he couldn't give the khutbah today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him a speedy recovery. Ameen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a specific surah in the Quran that addresses the relationship between power and our faith. And that surah is Surah Al-Anfal. Surah Al-Anfal has the iconic ayah, وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ, right? And prepare. And it navigates this understanding of power and the relationship of human with that power. There's one ayah in that surah, ayah 24, that I'm going to focus on today. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whenever you hear Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, that means there's either going to be an order or some advice coming after it. So whenever we hear Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu in the Quran, this is something to pay attention. Something is going to come that's going to tell me what to do. Just like if we hear Kalla in the Quran, this is a stop sign. Shaykh Al-Hanuti rahmatullahi alayh used to say this is the stop sign of the Quran. When you hear Kalla, you know something very dangerous and important is going to come. Pay attention. Stop. Be careful. So when we hear Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, we know something is going to come after it. Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu istajibu lillahi wa lirrasuli idha da'akum lima yuhyikum. O you who have believed, respond to Allah and His Messenger when He calls you to that which gives you life. And know that Allah stands between a person and their heart, and that to Him you will be gathered. That this message that we are being called to, this submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is life itself. Now, how many of you have heard of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt? If you've ever heard or paid your Social Security, you can thank FDR. FDR was the father of the idea of Social Security. FDR, in a famous speech in 1941, during the height or the beginnings of the World War, he said, freedom is for freedom of expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Freedom of expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. This is freedom. This is true liberation. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the recipe for true liberation before FDR, of course, because He is the Lord of FDR and everyone that came before FDR, and that is submission. Respond to Allah and His Messenger if they call you to something that will give you life. Now I'm going to tell a story. It's a story of a companion of the Prophet ﷺ who embodied these 4 freedoms that FDR spoke about. His name is Rabi'i ibn Amr. Rabi'i ibn Amr was one of the chieftains of the tribe of Bani Amr. And his famous story he had with the commanding general of the Persian Empire, Rustum. The Persian Empire was the superpower of the time. And the Muslims were the upstarts. So Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiyallahu anhu received a message from Rustum when the Muslim armies were in Persia that said he wants to negotiate. So Sa'd gathered the council and he says, what do you think? We should send a big delegation to him and show him that we are powerful. Rabi'i, who was attending the delegation, said no. We should send one person. One person that truly understands the message of La ilaha illallah and shows them that our power is in one person more than if we send them a delegation and they think we fear them. So they liked the idea. They said, okay, who would go? He said, I volunteer. Rabi'i was not a commander in the army. He was a soldier, but he was one of the chiefs of Bani Amr. So Rabi'i gets on his horse, and the narrations state that the horse of Rabi'i was short and its tail was short. It's like today if you see a car that has a flat tire or a dent in it or a mirror that's broken, this is what it's like. A short horse with a cut tail is considered like not a full horse. So he's riding this horse and he puts on regular clothing, he puts the spear on his back, he puts the sword on his side, and he takes a shield made out of palm fronds just to defend from the arrows. Now keep in mind the Persians at the time were superpower. So their shields were made out of metal. And they had big horses. So Rustum, before he arrived, he said, make my tent beautiful. Put out the silk rug. Put a bench made out of gold and let me lay on this bench and put out all of this jewelry and things to show who we are as Persians. And Rabi'i comes with his horse, this short horse that has a flat tire. And he approaches the tent of Rustum and they say, you got to get off your horse. He says, no, you invited me. You want me to go? I go as I please, otherwise I leave. And they said, okay, come on. So he comes riding this horse until the hoof of the horse touches the beginning of the silk of the tent, which is a no-no. This is silk. He gets off the horse, holds his spear, and starts walking and banging holes in the silk as he's walking. And Rustam's looking at this image, he's like, who is this guy? It doesn't make sense. This is like the best silk. He should be like, wow. He didn't care. Because he was free from want. Islam had freed Rib'i from the want of this dunya. He was free from fear. Because he knew that no matter what happens to him, it's either Jannah or Nasr, victory. He was free to express himself. So he approaches Rustam, and Rustam says, what are you calling people to? What do you guys want? Look at the power in this statement, brothers and sisters. He said, we came to deliver people, to free them from worshipping slaves to worshipping the Lord of all slaves. From the injustices of religion to the justice of Islam and Allah. And to deliver them from the narrowness of this dunya to the expanse of this world and the next. Look at the clarity of vision that he is expressing in just a few words. And Rustam says, well, what do you want? He said, either you embrace Islam, or you sign an agreement, or we fight. He said, but we're so much stronger than you. We will kill you. He said, well, it's either victory or Jannah. Those choices are fine with me. His mind was free from the want of dunya. His mind was free from the fear of the one who stood before him, even though he was the general of a superpower. So then he says, okay, give me a few days, let me consult. He said, how many days do you want? He said, I need a long time. He said, no, I'll give you 3 days. So Rustam is surprised. He says, are you a leader of the army? You're talking to me as if you control. He says, no, I'm just a regular soldier. He said, so how do you have this power? He said, because the word of the smallest of us will be kept by the biggest of us. You have 3 days. And in 3 days it will either be victory or Jannah for us. And he walks out. Rustam is shocked by this. He said, if this is a regular man, what are their leaders like? And he tells his council, I suggest we make an agreement with them. And his council, they tell him, what are you talking about? We are Persia. We are the superpower. Look how he is dressed. You're afraid of this man? Look at how he came in dressed. Look at his horse. He says, you guys are looking at the superficial. He doesn't care about his clothes because he has a bigger vision. And unless we are paying attention, we are going to be victim of that vision. Brothers and sisters, Islam, submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, gives us that freedom of expression, that freedom of worship, that freedom from want, and that freedom from fear. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Liberation and freedom are central tenets to our identity as Muslims, and that is why the message of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was fought to the death by the mushrikeen. When Bilal radiallahu anhu declared La ilaha illallah, his so-called master knew that he had no power and no control over the destiny of this man, which is why he placed a rock on his chest. Brothers and sisters, tomorrow commemorates a day of liberation. June 19th, Juneteenth, is a day that just now has been declared a federal holiday. But the reality is, if you don't know what Juneteenth is, it is because our history as a nation has been told from a perspective of liberation for a group and subjugation of others. Islam teaches us that true liberation is the submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Juneteenth commemorates on June 19th, 1864, I believe, or 65, the last of the enslaved people found out about the Emancipation Proclamation of President Lincoln. For 2 years, people didn't know that they were free, and they continued to be subjugated. So it's a day that's now being commemorated and remembered because this day in Galveston, Texas, as far west as Galveston, if you don't know where Galveston is, it's in the southernmost part of Texas on the Gulf of Mexico, below Houston. On June 19th in 1864 or 65, that's when they discovered that they were free. 2 years after that proclamation. Our role as Muslims in this society is to teach the ultimate freedom. But in the process of teaching ultimate freedom, we need to understand subjugation in our society. Because to free people from want, to free people from fear, to free people to express themselves, and to free people to worship, is what our role as Muslims is today in our society. This is the message of La ilaha illallah. That is why Rabi'i could stand in front of the superpower and talk as he talked. That freedom on June 19th is just a freedom from fear. And even until today, our African American brothers are still not free from fear when they're pulled over by a police officer. We need to strive to get this message of freedom in that submission to our society. That is our role as Muslims. Our role for striving for justice is just as important as our role in saying La ilaha illallah kunu qawwamina lillah shuhada'a bil qist. Standing constantly for Allah, witnesses for justice. That is the story of Rabi'i that should be repeated today. That is the story of Bilal, of others, of even Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam himself when he stood against the powers that be with nothing except the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and got a message that started with a few and has ended with billions today. But brothers and sisters, unless we free ourselves from wants, from fear, we will continue to be subjugated in our minds. If we understand that Allah is the Razzaq, we free ourselves from wants. If we understand that Allah is the Muhyi and the Mumit, the giver of life and the one that takes it, we free ourselves of fear. Those are the last two rings of subjugation that need to be broken in our community and for the larger society. Now you're going to tell me, why should I care? Because the subjugation of the African American brothers and sisters throughout our history as a nation is the same as the subjugation of our brothers and sisters in Kashmir, our brothers and sisters in China, in Myanmar. They never faced enslavement, but they are facing the subjugation that you see today. So unless we free our minds of supremacy, of skin color, of nations, of languages, and understand, as Rib'i said, the smallest of us, his word will be kept by the biggest of us. وَهَذِهِ أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ. That you are one nation. That's when we make a difference in our society. And it starts with La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who constantly strive for justice. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who are free of fear, free of want, free to express our belief, and free to speak truth to power when we need it. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us always standing firm for justice, to make us a community that is blessed to bring about change in our society. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to heal Sheikh Shakir and grant him a speedy recovery. Brothers and sisters, the takeaway is two this week. Number one, return to Surah Al-Anfal, Ayah 24. Understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying when He is calling us to life. استجيبوا لله وللرسول إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم. That life is in submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the number two thing is I want us all to go and read and understand about Juneteenth. Now you guys got a federal holiday. For those of you that work in the government or have holidays, great, you got a holiday. But if you don't understand why, what's the point? So let's go understand the history of Juneteenth. And by the way, a huge number of the enslaved Africans that were brought to this nation's shores were Muslim. I know of one in particular who was a Maliki scholar of fiqh in Georgia. And we know because his books are left in the University of Georgia Library. His name is Bilali Muhammad. You can go read about him. That's just one. But go and read the history of Juneteenth and understand what it means to our brothers and sisters that were enslaved in this nation. So number one, Ayah 24 of Surah Al-Anfal. Number two, the history and understanding of Juneteenth. Inna Allahu malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Wa aqimus salah.